The Admiral's voice, a choked whisper, cut through the sterile office air. "Nora Briggs, Black Echo Team, I thought you were dead." The woman who had been silently typing minutes before now stood with a ramrod-straight posture, her salute crisp and perfect. "Requesting permission to resume duty, sir." The world seemed to stop. How did a ghost end up as a secretary in the heart of Naval Command? And what mission was so important that it pulled her back from the shadows? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The day began, as it always did, with the scent of industrial-grade cleaner and cheap percolated coffee. It was the official perfume of bureaucracy, a smell Nora Briggs had come to associate with a peculiar kind of safety. Her world was a small, meticulously controlled cubicle in a vast high-tech administrative office that served a vital naval command unit. The primary sound was the gentle, ever-present hum of servers and ventilation systems, a white noise blanket that smothered all but the most determined sounds, like the rhythmic, almost imperceptible tapping of her own keyboard. She was the epitome of the invisible secretary, a woman who seemed to fade into the beige and gray surroundings. Her clothing was a uniform of anonymity, conservative blouses buttoned one notch higher than fashion dictated, sensible skirts, and practical silent shoes. Her hair, a nondescript brown, was perpetually twisted into a severe, immaculate bun at the nape of her neck, a style that pulled her features into a mask of serene neutrality. Her desk was a testament to her personality, or the deliberate lack thereof. Pens were aligned in a perfect row, a single notepad sat squared to the corner of her desk, and the monitor was positioned at a precise 90-degree angle to the keyboard. There were no photographs of smiling family members, no quirky coffee mugs, no wilting desk plants. It was a space of pure function, occupied by a woman colleagues saw as little more than a ghost in the machine, a gray mouse who ensured the gears of command turned without a single squeak. Nora's fingers moved over the keyboard with a speed and accuracy that was, if anyone had ever bothered to truly watch, deeply unsettling. She fielded calls with a voice that was polite yet utterly forgettable, transcribed garbled, jargon-filled dictations into pristine reports, and managed the complex, overlapping schedules of 3 senior officers without ever appearing flustered. She was a machine, an organic processor of information who never made mistakes and never engaged in the idle chatter that served as the lifeblood of any other office. Attempts at personal conversation were met with a polite but impenetrable wall. She would answer direct questions with the briefest possible response before seamlessly redirecting the conversation back to work. All the while, she observed, her gaze, seemingly fixed on her screen, would flicker for a fraction of a second longer than normal toward the main entrance, cataloging the security credentials of every person who entered or left. She registered the subtle shift in weight of a maintenance worker whose tool belt seemed heavier than it should, the faint tremor in a junior officer's hand as he signed for a classified document, the almost invisible sheen of sweat on the brow of a visiting dignitary. She was a passive sensor array, absorbing terabytes of data that no one else even knew existed. Beneath this placid, controlled exterior, a low-level tension hummed constantly. This quiet, predictable life was a cage, but it was a cage of her own design. It was both a penance for past failures and a shield against future threats. The irony of her situation was a constant, bitter companion, to be surrounded by the very world she had supposedly died to escape, to be a ghost haunting the halls of power, unseen and unheard. Yet, she found a strange, almost monastic comfort in the rigid order and absolute predictability of it all. Her former life had been a maelstrom of chaos, violence, and adrenaline, a world where every decision carried the weight of life and death. Here, the most pressing crisis was a scheduling conflict or a jammed printer. This sterile peace was the antithesis of everything she had been. And for 5 years, it had been her sanctuary and her prison. She was a predator forced to live as prey, and the strain of that deception was a physical weight on her soul. "Nora, you're a machine. I swear you don't even breathe," a cheerful voice chirped, shattering her concentration. Jessica, a junior aide from the logistics department, leaned against the partition of Nora's cubicle, a steaming mug in her hand. "You have to come out for drinks with us sometime. Let your hair down. What do you even do for fun?" The questions were innocent. A friendly overture from a colleague who saw Nora's isolation as a puzzle to be solved. Nora's fingers never stopped typing. She finished the sentence, her eyes still on the screen, before slowly turning her head. A polite, practiced smile touched her lips, but did not reach her eyes. "Thank you, Jessica, but I have plans," she replied, her voice soft and even. It was the same answer she always gave. She then reached into a perfectly organized tray, retrieved a thick bound document, and held it out. "Here are those reports you needed, collated and cross-referenced by sector and date, just as you requested." Jessica took the heavy file, her cheerful demeanor faltering slightly under the weight of Nora's dispassionate efficiency. She mumbled her thanks and retreated, leaving Nora once again in the quiet hum of her self-imposed solitude. Nora's gaze drifted back to her monitor, but for a moment, her focus was not on the text. It was on Jessica's reflection in the dark screen, watching the younger woman rejoin a laughing group by the coffee machine, their easy camaraderie a world away from her own. The sterile air of the office began to crackle with a new energy. A buzz of anticipation, usually reserved for 3-day weekends or holiday bonuses, swept through the cubicles. Admiral Thompson, a man who had seemed as permanent as the building itself, had finally retired, and his replacement was due to arrive at any moment. The staff were on edge, speculating in hushed tones about the new boss. Rumor had it he was a hardliner, a career officer forged in the crucible of special operations, a man named Hayes. Nora, however, remained a picture of impassivity. While others nervously adjusted their ties or reapplied lipstick, she continued her work, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she finalized the morning's briefing summaries. Her detachment did not go unnoticed. Her colleagues, already perplexed by her, now saw her lack of excitement as profoundly odd, another piece of evidence in the case of her strangeness. She was an island of calm in a sea of nervous energy, and it made them deeply uncomfortable. The main doors slid open with a soft hiss, and a wave of silence washed over the office. Admiral Hayes entered, and his presence was immediate and absolute. He was a man in his late 50s, tall and lean, with a face that looked as if it had been carved from granite and left out in the sun and wind. His uniform was immaculate, his posture exuded an effortless authority. But it was his eyes that commanded attention. They were the weary, intelligent eyes of a man who had seen too much, who had borne the weight of impossible decisions and carried the ghosts of fallen soldiers. He moved with a quiet confidence, greeting the senior staff with a firm handshake and a voice that was calm, measured, and authoritative. He offered a few words about honoring Admiral Thompson's legacy while looking toward the future, standard fare for a change of command, but his delivery gave the tired words a new gravity. The staff listened with rapt attention, their earlier nervousness replaced by a sense of respect. This was a man who inspired confidence. The Admiral concluded his initial greetings, his gaze sweeping across the open-plan office, acknowledging the sea of faces with a brief, professional nod. His eyes scanned the room, a commander assessing his new territory, and then they landed on Nora's desk. He froze. It was not a dramatic halt, but a subtle cessation of movement, a pause so brief that only someone trained to notice such things would have caught it. He was mid-sentence, speaking to his new executive officer, but the words died in his throat. The friendly, commanding facade he had worn since entering the room dropped away, replaced by a look of raw, unfiltered disbelief. A flicker of something else crossed his face, a shadow of old grief, of a wound that had never properly healed. The executive officer followed his gaze, confused, seeing only the quiet, unremarkable secretary typing diligently at her workstation. "Nora Briggs?" The Admiral's voice was soft, almost a whisper to himself, but in the suddenly silent room, it sounded like a thunderclap. Every head turned, every conversation stopped, all eyes fixed on the gray mouse in the corner, who had suddenly become the center of the universe. Nora's fingers stopped moving. She slowly lifted her head, her placid expression unchanged, and met the Admiral's stare. The noise level in the room went from a low hum to absolute zero. Someone's coffee mug slipped from their grasp and shattered on the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the tomb-like silence. Admiral Hayes took a half-step forward, his eyes wide, his mind clearly struggling to reconcile the impossible. "Black Echo Team," he said, his voice louder now, more certain, laced with a terrible, dawning comprehension. "I thought you—" He trailed off, the implication hanging in the air, thick and heavy with the ghosts of the past. In that moment, A transformation occurred. Nora Briggs stood up. She did not rise like a secretary, but like a soldier answering a call to arms. Her movements were fluid and precise, her posture shifting in an instant from the unassuming slump of an office worker to the ramrod-straight, rigid bearing of a highly disciplined operative. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted, and the quiet, deferential woman who had occupied that desk for 5 years simply vanished. In her place stood someone else entirely, a woman of immense presence and unspoken danger. With emotion so sharp and flawless it seemed to cut the air, she raised her hand to her brow in a perfect, crisp salute. The gesture was a relic of a forgotten life, an instinct buried but not dead. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong, devoid of emotion. "Requesting permission to resume duty, sir." The Admiral's face was a storm of conflicting emotions, shock warring with a dawning, terrible understanding. For a heartbeat, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then, his training, honed over decades of crisis, kicked in. His voice, when he spoke, was a low growl that cut through the paralysis gripping the room. "In my office, now." He turned on his heel without waiting for a reply, his rigid back a clear dismissal of the dozens of gaping mouths and wide eyes. He didn't look at Nora, but she was already moving, her steps silent and economical as she followed in his wake. The door to the Admiral's spacious, soundproof office clicked shut behind them, and the silence inside was a physical presence, heavier and more profound than the stunned quiet she had left behind. Admiral Hayes walked directly to a small, concealed bar, his movements stiff. He ignored the decanters of whiskey and brandy, instead pulling out a bottle of water and 2 glasses. His hands, which had signed orders that moved fleets and decided the fates of men, were not entirely steady as he poured. He handed 1 glass to Nora before downing his own in 2 quick swallows. He gestured vaguely toward one of the plush leather chairs opposite his mahogany desk. But he didn't sit. He began to pace, a caged lion trying to comprehend how a ghost had just walked into his den. "The report said you were gone," he began, his voice raspy with emotion he fought to control. "The official report, the after action, the casualty notification, it said you were caught in the blast, vaporized. There was nothing to recover." He stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes boring into her, searching for an explanation that could possibly make sense. "We had a funeral, Nora, a memorial service at Annapolis. I gave the eulogy. I stood in front of a folded flag and spoke about your courage, your sacrifice." He ran a hand over his face, the weariness in his eyes deepening into a raw, personal pain. "I mourned you. Your whole team mourned you." Nora stood perfectly still, her posture unwavering, the glass of water held loosely in her hand. She had not taken a sip. She had anticipated this reaction, had played this scene in her mind 1,000 times over 5 years. But the reality of his grief was a sharp, unexpected blow. "The objective was to be a ghost, sir," she said, her voice a low monotone. A carefully constructed wall against the flood of her own memories. "The explosion provided the opportunity. It was a clean break. The enemy needed to believe I was eliminated. Our own command needed to believe it. A true ghost leaves no trace, no lingering questions." "A clean break?" he shot back, his voice rising. "To what end? To disappear and become a secretary? Of all the places in the world, Nora, why here? Why hide inside the lion's den, typing memos and fetching coffee?" He gestured around the office at the symbols of the very power structure she had vanished from. "It makes no sense." Nora finally allowed herself to move. She placed the untouched glass of water on a coaster on the corner of his desk with meticulous care. When she looked up, the placid mask had begun to crack, and for the first time, the Admiral saw a flicker of the immense personal cost of her long exile. "Because the mission failed, sir," she stated, her voice dropping, laced with a cold, hard fury that was far more terrifying than any shout. "Black Echo was compromised. The intel for the extraction in Odessa was a lie from the moment we received it. The ambush wasn't bad luck. It was a setup. Someone on the inside, someone with access to our mission parameters, sold us out to the highest bidder." She took a slow breath, the memory of fire and screaming and betrayal rising in her throat. "I couldn't hunt them from the outside. A ghost can't run background checks, can't access secure servers, can't cross-reference personnel files. To find the traitor, I had to be where the secrets are kept. I had to become part of the furniture." Her gaze was unflinching. I haven't been fetching coffee, sir. I've been watching. I've been listening. For 5 years, I have been hunting. The Admiral stared at her, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. The shock on his face slowly gave way to a deep, almost paternal concern, which was then eclipsed by the grim weight of professional gravity. He finally understood. This wasn't a retirement, it was an infiltration. A one-woman, deep-cover operation of unimaginable length and discipline. He saw the lines of strain around her eyes that he had previously mistaken for middle-aged weariness. He saw the rigid control in her posture, not as stiffness, but as the iron will of a soldier holding a lonely post. He remembered the eulogy he gave, the words about her dedication, and felt a fresh wave of grief, not for her death, but for her life. The life she had sacrificed to stand this silent, solitary watch. When she spoke of her lost team, a flicker of raw, unadulterated pain broke through her stoicism, a momentary tremor in her voice that revealed the wound she carried. "They were good men, sir," she whispered, and the sound was so full of loss that the Admiral had to look away. He walked to his desk and leaned on it, the full weight of her revelation settling upon him. He had been reassigned to this command for a reason that now seemed terrifyingly connected to the ghost standing in his office. "The reason I'm here, Nora," he said, his tone shifting, becoming the commander she remembered. "It's not a standard rotation. There have been a series of intelligence breaches, subtle but catastrophic." He powered on a large holographic display built into his desk, and a complex web of data shimmered into existence in the air between them. 6 weeks ago, we lost the final schematics for the Sea Serpent's new stealth coating, a next-generation technology that would have made our submarine fleet virtually invisible. He pointed to a node on the chart. The data packet vanished from a secure server. No alarms were tripped, no trace of a hack. It just ceased to exist in our system. The official investigation is going in circles. They're looking for an external hack, a foreign agency. They're wrong. He looked up from the glowing data, his eyes meeting hers. The methods are too sophisticated, too clean. It's not a brute force attack, it's a key holder. It's a ghost moving through our own digital hallways. It points to a highly placed mole, someone with top-level clearance and an intimate knowledge of our network architecture. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "The breach has the same signature as the leak that doomed your team in Odessa." He gestured for her to come closer. Nora moved to his side, her eyes, no longer passive and secretarial, scanning the glowing charts and data streams. The transformation was absolute. The gray mouse was gone, and in her place was the analyst, the strategist, the predator. Her mind, honed by years of covert warfare and sharpened by 5 years of obsessive, silent observation, began to work. Her eyes moved with terrifying speed, absorbing, processing, connecting dots that no one else had even seen. The official investigators had spent weeks sifting through this data and found nothing. Nora saw it in less than a minute. Her fingers shot out, pointing not at the missing file's location, but at a completely different part of the network diagram, a section detailing routine, low-priority system communications. "There," she said, her voice sharp and certain. "They're wrong because the signal isn't coming from outside. It's bouncing off a domestic civilian server, masked as a diagnostic handshake for a system software update. The data was siphoned off in micro packets, each one too small to trigger content-based security flags. The source isn't external. The source is right here, in this building." She zoomed in on the data stream, her fingers manipulating the holographic display with an innate familiarity. A string of code appeared, a complex encryption protocol. "It's the same protocol," she whispered, her voice a mixture of vindication and ice. "The same one they used to track our movements in real time in Odessa. I designed the countermeasure myself, but we never got to implement it." She looked at Admiral Hayes, her eyes burning with an intensity that made the powerful man take an involuntary step back. "I know this enemy, sir, because I helped create the tactics they're using against us." The air in the room crackled with the implications of her discovery. She was no longer just a ghost from the past, a soldier he had mourned. She was the single most important strategic asset in his arsenal. She was the only person in the world who understood the enemy's methods because she had been there at their inception. The official investigation was a blind man searching for a black cat in a dark room that wasn't there. Nora could see in the dark. The Admiral looked from Nora's intense, focused face to the data glowing in the air, his mind racing. The mole who had sold out Black Echo was still active, had burrowed deeper into the heart of Naval Command, and was now selling the crown jewels of their technology. He looked back at Nora, at the woman who had sacrificed 5 years of her life, who had buried herself alive, all for this one purpose. Her request from minutes before, the one that had shocked an entire office into silence, now echoed in his mind with a new, profound meaning. He straightened up, his decision made. The paternal concern was gone, replaced by the cold, hard resolve of a commander on the eve of battle. "Your request to resume duty is granted, effective immediately," he said, his voice resonating with authority. "But not on the official record. To the world. To this office, you are still Nora Briggs, my quiet, efficient secretary. But to me,